And I think a lot of people have this idea. They have so many stories about what homeschooling or unschooling must look like. And I just would invite everybody to start to dismantle. Is that true? Do I really know anybody like that?
You're listening to the Naturally Noelle Show, brought to you by Noelle's Naturals, all natural products that really work. And now, please welcome entrepreneur, wife, homeschooling mom of 4, and founder of the Noelle's Naturals brand of products, your host, Noelle Talley.
Well, hey guys, thanks so much for joining us today. Our topic today is going to be homeschooling. If you don't already know, I was actually homeschooled all the way through high school, and I do homeschool my children. So today we are going to be talking to Sue Patterson. She specializes in something called unschooling. If you've never heard of unschooling today, you are going to learn all about it. This is actually the method that I use for schooling my children, and it's loosely kind of what my parents used to school me. And I really just love the whole idea behind it. It really just is kind of very countercultural. Even within the homeschooling community, it really just there's just so many interesting and cool ideas that I really think that you guys are really going to resonate with. If you're a rebel, if you're someone who just wants to do things differently than the way you've always been told, if there's a sneaking suspicion that the way things have been taught to you was maybe not right, then this could be right for you. This method is not for everybody, but for those that really resonate with it, it's really just kind of like a game changer. So you're going to love Sue. Sue is a veteran homeschooler. All of her children are grown. She graduated all of them using this method of homeschooling. Now she is spending her time helping coach moms, teaching them in the unschooling method. She has so many resources, which we will talk about at the end of the episode, but I know you guys are going to love it. Here we go.
Well, Sue, thank you so much for joining me today. So happy to have you.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, you were such a warm and inviting presence. We were chatting a little bit before the show, and you just are so much fun.
Oh, good, good, good. Well, I'm the same here as I am in real life. Some people are not that. And so I'm like, no, I'm just the same.
Yeah. Well,
So,
so just give me a little bit of just history on you and how you ended up homeschooling in the first place.
okay, because I had no intention of this. I was just a regular suburban mom going through life, putting my kids in preschool, thinking about how I was going to go back to work, and plugging along. And then I have 3 kids, and my oldest then went off to kindergarten, and my middle one was in preschool, and my youngest was a baby, and school was, boring, and he already knew how to read, and so he would get in trouble for not reading in unison off the chalkboard with all the other kids. And then, he was just a regular rambunctious little 6-year-old. And they're like, well, I think he could be in the gifted program, but he won't sit still for the test. I'm like, then test him orally. But no, 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 that's not how that system worked. And so it became this real reminder of what a system it was. And so I was having like these flashbacks to my own school experience of like, no, no, the system matters the most. And so I ran into somebody who homeschooled her kids in a traditional sense, that they had curriculum, but these teenagers made eye contact and they talked to you. And I poked my head into her kitchen one time, and they were like pushing soap bubbles into each other's faces like normal kids. And I'm like, oh, you mean like normal people do this? and and so I started picking her brain. And so this was the 90s. So, um, it was a smaller subset of people. And my son, though, was going to school and and it was becoming more of a drag. And he would go in happy and come out shoulders slumped. And then I would look, and those big kids, like third and fourth grade, they look like zombies. And I thought, wow, I just don't want to sentence him to 11 more years of this. And we were military, and we were about to move from San Antonio to Alaska. And I said, I think we'll just do it. No one will know. We're way up there. Who's going to find us? And so I packed up their stuff, which they interestingly, they gave me in this sealed envelope that said his records, do not open, hand to the school. And I'm like, oh, you write do not open, and I'm tearing that baby open.
What
I'm
an
the
odd thing to say to a parent, "Don't look at your own child's academic
Right? Is
records."
that weird? It was so weird, and so I looked at it. It was nothing secretive to be. I think what they're afraid of is you're going to doctor the records and give him all A's or something and then hand it to the school. I don't know. And so I'm like, well, no, I'll just put this aside. We're not going to a school. But it was interesting because I thought of homeschooling. I had no idea what the word unschooling was, but I thought of homeschooling as creative and following curiosities and diving into topics. And I was still very much in the lanes of subjects, but I was thinking of all the cool ways to learn them as opposed to standing at the front of the kitchen table and lecturing on it. But marketing being what it is and me being a mere mortal, I bought Calvert, school in a box. That's their tagline. I'm like, holy moly, what would have ever, and it was not good. And so I thought, well, I got to have a teacher oversee me. I still had that thing going on in my head. And and so I'm sending this work in, and she's like, no, he has to write about this little red car because it has to do with the penmanship and the way the letters connect. I'm like, yeah, but we just had an earthquake and there's a moose at the window and he wants to write about that. She goes, oh, no, 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 no. Can't do that. And I'm like, So a couple months into that, tears from both of us. And we had a ceremonial breaking of the pencils. We shall not write for that woman in Baltimore.
I love it.
And we will do whatever we want. And so what we started doing was we would read great illustrated classics. These were these books that were like $3 at the bookstore. And they're really adult literacy books, but they were books like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or Oliver Twist or something like that. And it was like one page of a drawing and one page of a really large font, edited for learning to read kind of kids, perfect for a second grader. And so instead of book reports that they wanted, we did Fimo clay representations from the book. So we had a bowl with porridge, and we had a spear, and we had a whale, and we had different things that went with the books because I was still thinking book report. How can I do book report fun? Which, of course, I should just say now I know there's no need for a book report. Have a conversation. If he wants to make a representation of it, which he did have a shelf full of all his little Fimo clay representations, but this was a kid that had been to school. So he was happy to do a Fimo clay representation instead of a book report. My other kids were like, what do you want that for? I'm like, I don't, never mind. And so we started on that path, and I met an unschooler, and I'm like, what is that? Sounds crazy. Why would you, not educate your child? And, I had all these thoughts, and there were people in the homeschooling community that were very anti-unschooling. They really thought that was unparenting. They thought that was neglectful. They thought they thought it was the path to ruin. That was back when they said there was an author, Mary Pride, and she wrote something in the New York Times that said unschooling was going to be the downfall of homeschooling, that these were feral children.
Oh, my children are definitely feral.
Well, as I watched my kid, we were in Alaska, and I'd just taken them to a reindeer farm, and there was my kid out in the pasture running with caribou. I'm like, well, they may not be running wild with wolves, but they are running with caribou. It was not the downfall. And it was actually, I'd like to think of it as like the Wizard of Oz, where you're living in black and white, and then you walk through the Technicolor door, and suddenly learning is the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Learning is vibrant and interesting and not on somebody else's pace, on your pace. And then the more I started getting into it, the more I realized this is what individualizing is. They talk about IEPs, and individualized plans, but that's like limited option multiplication test. This is individualizing on steroids. This is individualizing to the max, where you are looking at the learner first and not the curriculum first, and thinking, how am I going to shove that in? Whereas we're looking at what is he interested in and how can that ripple out? And what can I do? Because talk about the opposite of lazy. It as a parent, as an unschooling parent, what I'm doing is fueling it. What do I see? Oh, I have enough life experience to know there's this cool thing downtown that we could go to. I think you'd really like it. And I'm like, I don't know. I know, trust me. And so that's the whole thing about unschooling is you really work on that trust so that you are partnering with them so that when you make a suggestion, they're like, I don't know, but I'll trust you because they know that you won't make them stay for 6 months at it because we're not quitters. I think that's important for people to kind of see. And, the other part that I just want to make sure that people get about this whole journey for us is nothing happened right away. It was like layer after layer after layer. As soon as you cleaned off one lens, you discovered a dirty one underneath. And you're like, oh, we'll never do this unschooling thing for chores. We lived on, then we moved around, because we're military. And I'm like, if I rely on unschooling principles for chores, we'll have a bunch of dead animals on the ranch. And, I just kept going in that direction only to discover really if you partner with them, the animals won't die. We'll all figure out how to live together without me being top down, do this before you do that kind of a way. And it's not something you come up with in the beginning. In the beginning, you're really worried about how they're going to learn, how they're going to learn. And then you get that figured out. And then how am I going to connect with them? And then how do I trust them? So we're always learning how to undo that schooly thought, and they're always learning how to handle freedom.
Mm,
And
mm.
so when we have the two of those happening at the same time, we got some missteps here and there, big ones sometimes, and that's okay. Try again tomorrow
Yes.
because this is individualizing. So
Yes.
there's my little journey story.
I love it. So just a little bit about my background for those that don't know. I was homeschooled. So I went to first through third grade at public school.
Okay.
My mom had pulled my older sister out because at the time this was in the 90s in Florida, and they were doing like these things where they were putting kids in these sixth and seventh grade centers, and they were sending them to like these inner city schools, and it was just dangerous. And there were all these terrible stories of kids getting like stabbed in the hallways. And she's like, well, yeah, we're not going to do that. So her
What year
plan
did you
was,
say that was? What year
so
ish?
that was mid 90s,
Okay.
I
That
believe.
was when we started 96.
Yeah, we're OG homeschoolers.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was just going to be for those 2 years for my sister because
Right.
she didn't want to send her to to those dangerous schools, and then she was going to pull her out. And when she did school in a box, I think it was Pace.
Oh,
Do
yeah,
you
yeah, I
remember the
remember that, right?
little booklets?
Yeah, yeah.
She started that, and the guy that got her set up said, you're going to love this.
Oh,
And
yeah.
she's like, "Okay, okay, we'll see." And, the very next year, she went ahead and pulled my brother out and decided to homeschool all of us. And I had been in a gifted program. They actually had pulled me for, ADHD testing because
Right,
I
that's
was
what they were gonna do with my son.
yes, so when a kid is wiggly at their desk and
Oh, yeah.
bored by the
Right,
material,
right.
they think, "Oh, you're ADHD." They never think, "Well, maybe this kid just needs to play."
Well, or in my son's case, the playground was under construction and they had to play quietly between the 2 buildings. Oh, yeah, like a 6 or 7-year-old needs to play quietly between 2 buildings. And
Mhm.
then when they got him in the gifted program, it happened during PE. You're like, "This is not really thinking it through. This kid
Yes.
needs to run a few laps around the building loudly."
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was me. I had a lot of questions, and I still do. I am a question
Yeah,
asking person. I love
very.
to research, and so I would stop and disrupt class. I would say, "Hold on a second. I need more information here. But that was not allowed. You're not
Oh,
allowed to stop
no, no,
and
no,
ask
no, no,
questions and be
no. We've
curious.
gotta check some boxes.
Exactly. So my mom thankfully saw that early on, and I think she saw that I was not going to do well in any kind of system. I
Yeah,
still don't do well in
no,
systems.
it's hard.
So she saw that and pulled us all out and began homeschooling. And we definitely did more traditional homeschooling in the beginning. My mom is very type A and she wanted, little rows and desks and everything organized. And she had this vision in her head of what homeschooling would look like, but very quickly realized that we were revolting.
Well, I think that once you let a kid, I think we all have that inner feeling of like, I want to learn, I want to be curious. And then it gets tamped down with this school approach. You're like, no, shelve that. You can have that after you've checked these boxes. But when we bring a kid home to homeschool and we start to kind of water that little plant about, oh, let's learn something fun. Let's really learn something fun, not something like pace that the guy says is fun. And then you're like, no. And the kids resist it. And instead of having the squashing down like you have at school, too bad, you've got to. And then all the coercive stuff that like, well, you won't graduate or you won't have all these future successes. Our kids are like, let's play with these learning things. And next thing you know, they're like, why are you dragging a workbook in here?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because life is full of cooler stuff than that.
It's actually a little bit of a problem in our home is that my children take things that are not meant to be toys and use them for different purposes. And I'm like, stop being so creative with all of our stuff.
Right,
I
right,
can't find my broom because you guys were using it as a machine gun.
right. Or it's like propping up the tent. It's the tent spike in the middle. When we think about it from a learning standpoint, fueling that kind of curiosity, that's hugely important when we have, especially in this day and age where we have access to the facts. The facts are easy to find. You can even Google what's 7 times 6. You can Google what's the capital of whatever, but how do I look at what I've got and figure out what to do? That is life experience. And so when kids have the opportunity to do that as their life, then and they're not like having all these speed bumps in the road of no, but we've got to memorize the times tables and we've got to learn our diphthongs and we've got to learn things like that. No, we don't, because as they become necessary to do the thing they want to do, then they'll learn it. If they're playing their video game and they keep calling you over to read the instructions, pretty soon they start to see some similar things. And so many kids I've heard of that learn to read from playing Minecraft because they have to read the stuff. And so instead of saying, here, read this list of spelling words, you're basically giving them a list of spelling words based upon what's happening in their real life and what their needs are. So they can spell subscribe and exit and all kinds of words that probably wouldn't make it to a first grade spelling list,
Mm.
but they're necessary in their life.
Talk to me briefly about the difference between deschooling and unschooling, because I think people hear unschooling and they think that means you don't do any schooling. And then there's also deschooling, which is kind of unraveling
Right.
these mindsets you have of what school is. So let's kind of break down those
Okay.
two different
'Cause it's
things.
kind of like a path, right?
Yes.
So we have school with our subjects and our tests and our system above individual and our teacher driven materials, and that's school. And then we move over, and some people very traditionally duplicate school and they keep their subjects and their teacher driven and their testing and grade level materials and stuff like that. And then keeping on going in on that continuum, we have people that have subjects, but they kind of color them up and they find more cool things, but they're still very much in their subject lanes. But as we deschool, we start to dismantle those subject lanes, those needs for testing, those needs for grade level determination, those needs for teacher driven learning. and we start to prioritize the learner and look for learning in life. But it takes a while because most of us have had at least 12 years of conditioning that the school way is your golden ticket for success. And it isn't. I mean, the truth is the school way, and if you really go back historically, the school way is about how to make a good worker, how to make everybody respond to the bill, how to make everybody sit down and shut up, how to make everybody check the boxes that the boss says to check. And so school does that really well. And then what does it do? It says, because your success is going to come if you have more school. So have more school after your school, and then more school after that. And so it is just a school path that is only all of the ways that you're like, well, I was really good in school. And you can think, maybe, fine, but think how you could have been if you had been allowed the freedom of learning the things you were interested in. You learned how to hack the system. You learned how to be a good cog in the wheel. And while I think it's important for people. I think that's why we have so many people that have a midlife crisis,
Mm,
because they've never had an opportunity to like explore themselves and what are my preferences and what are my interests and how do I dismantle that story of I'm not a good reader or I'm not a good writer, and you're like, I'm not that bad. I'm good enough. And you start to play with stuff, and then you have kind of a midlife crisis because all those years you were told a certain thing, and then real life shows you differently. And so,
mm,
what happens with unschooled kids is they get this opportunity to get to know themselves, to do their curiosities, to learn about their preferences and dislikes and how to critically look at things. And they don't have to wait to learn that after
mm,
school is over, because really that's the more important stuff, because it's so easy to find the facts now. We don't have to wait till we go to the library on Thursday to look that up. We
mm,
can put it on our phone and find out where is that or what happened and what are they like, and the kids are now very very capable of doing that, and that has shifted everything, and I think it's shifted away from that traditional school approach, because now kids can see and adults can see we can learn whatever we want to learn, we can learn
mm,
whatever we're curious about, we don't have to wait for teacher approval. But the deschooling part, there's still so much people pleasing, that we learned in school because we're just trying to get that A, trying to get that little nod from the teacher. And instead of honing that skill, our kids get this opportunity to become more self-aware. And so I think deschooling is the process of learning that. It's the process of shedding the lies, really, that
mm,
school told us so that they could run their system smoothly, and moving towards what real life looks like today, not that same way with the rows of desks, and that hasn't changed over time, but in your life, you have a audiobook in the living room and a cozy area to sit, and you don't have to sit at a desk. And I think a lot of people have this idea, they have so many stories about what homeschooling or unschooling must look like, and I just would invite everybody to start to dismantle. Is that true? Do I really know anybody like that? And what do I like or dislike about it? What works? And then to always remember it's a process. You're going to be dismantling things forever because you had so much time in there.
I feel like I'm so glad you went there because I feel like my audience is so much the person that is in this process of dismantling all these lies we've been fed in our whole life. Lies that we were fed by the medical system and people that were failed by that system. So many people that were told, take this pharmaceutical medication,
Right.
it'll fix you. And so now they're looking for, clean products, and they're looking for, they're told,
Healthy
oh yes,
food. Yeah.
yeah, the food system and the food pyramid and fats are horrible for you, and all these lies that we've been fed in all these different directions. And it's that paradigm shift is painful, it's uncomfortable, and it's difficult when your whole life you've been told this is the way, and then suddenly you realize that is not the way and it failed me. And so I feel like it's just a natural progression for the person who has been on that journey of maybe first they started having health issues and so they started to do natural, and then they thought, well, through COVID everyone saw how fragile our whole economic system
So
was,
many systems.
and they said, okay, I'm going to start, having my own chickens and growing my own garden because I want to be self-sufficient. I feel like homeschooling is just the natural next progression in that thought process. Okay, the government has failed me in all these different ways.
Why
Why
would I
am
put my
I still
kid?
why
Yeah,
am I still trusting these people who continually lie to us
with my
and feed us
children.
garbage with your children, with your babies? I That was my ultimate. I mean, I grew up homeschooling, and I went through kind of when my kids were first coming of age to be schooled. I went through a lot of self-doubt, and it's so funny, even someone who is a product of homeschooling and grew up in this world, I felt so inadequate and was really considering putting my kids in school. And ultimately when I looked at the paperwork and it was asking all this information about their vaccine status and all these things, and I thought, this is none of their business. Like, why
Right?
would I send my kids to a government indoctrination center?
I know. I
And that
read
was it
something
for me.
about if you were to look at what we do with our kids, as a society from an alien perspective, that like, oh, so they rip them away from their family and they push them all together based on their year of birth, and they feed them exactly the same thing over and over and over, and they say individualism is good, but learn this, learn this, learn this. And then as they get older and they're like, why are they not motivated? Well, we strip them of that too, because we really only wanted them to go for the external motivations that they have set in place. And it's a weird thing what we do with our families and our kids when you start to peel back the layers and really look, that why would we say, I hope the adult in charge pays attention to my kid. And so I think
Yeah.
it's interesting.
So I want to kind of touch on a couple other questions that I know people are probably having. So, do you do any lessons at all? And I mean, I know the answer for our family and what we do, but I think that's people's biggest thing is, where are the lessons? How are they going to learn anything without lessons?
Okay, so I think we have to redefine lessons. Lessons don't have to look like school. Lessons happen in conversations. Lessons happen in life experience. Lessons happens when you watch a Lizzie McGuire movie and it, I'm thinking of my kids because they're now all in their 30s. And you're like, wow, did you see how that girl treated that girl? That was not going well. And suddenly you're having conversations and they're learning a lesson. Or we want to build this fort, and the fort falls apart if I don't have these certain things, and we're learning about physics and we're learning about measuring distances, even if we're just eyeballing it. We're having opportunities to learn lessons all through life. It's about making sure kids have full, rich lives. Then we don't have to do a a lesson. That's really more of like you think of like big pharma, you think of big curriculum, curriculum sells and it feeds those fears of the parents, and the parents think, I'm a little afraid, I'm a little unsure. Oh, they say the kids will be happy. They say it will be fun. Well, that's fun by school standards, not fun by real life standards, usually. And that does not mean that you won't go buy a cool science kit that has owl pellets or something in it. We did that kind of stuff all the time. And when you're like, yeah, but what about the basics? Well, you have to have the basics to read the directions for the owl pellets. And so suddenly learning to read happens without you saying, now let's sit down and read about Dick and Jane and the cat and the whatever. And so if you have the real life happening, the basics come in. And so I have a math course because so many people worry about math. And it's about all the ways that math happens in your life, because we are still very much school indoctrinated. Even when we think, okay, I'm not sending my kid, we still have layers and layers of it in there. And so you're like, well, I hate math. I'm math phobic, and we have a whole nation that thinks that they have math issues. And so why would you send them? Why would you have them learn math the way that created all that math insecurity for you? Why not learn about math? Like, how much will it cost to fly to grandma's? How much would it cost to drive? Let's do the map. Oh, where's the best gas prices as you're driving to the grocery store? And let's look at what Roman numerals are on that. My kid told me the other day, she says, I was at Target and I saw one of those Roman numeral clocks like we used to have. And it was made in China because it did 1, 2, 3, and it did 4 as 4 little lines instead of IV because the letters meant nothing to them. They don't speak that language and write that language. And she said, so it was kind of cool that I'm like, oh, I remember that. And, so things happen just because of life experiences, and you're involved with them, and you're kind of a little extra narration of what's going on and things that are happening because you're partnering with them and you want them to notice things. And so that's what you're doing instead of lesson plans. And so if you remember that lesson plans are somebody else, like running you through a cattle chute, you don't have to do that. You could just free range in the pasture and be okay. And so, and especially now with the internet, all you really need is good
Mhm.
Wi-Fi.
It's so funny. We do it all the time. People ask, okay, so what do you do with your kids? Or when do you do lessons? And I'm just like, we just talk to our kids and we listen to them and we ask questions, and we don't just say, no, 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 not right now. I'm busy. When they ask about something like, oh, look at this
That's the joke.
lizard. Oh, look, these two lizards are fighting. And we say, oh, they are fighting. Actually, what are they doing? What is this about? And so we go to the library and we get a book about lizards and we
Or
learn
you
something
watch
about,
it on YouTube.
or we pull up a YouTube video. It's so much
Right.
easier for us now than it was when I was a
Oh,
kid.
I
And
know. I
even though
know.
my parents did lessons,
Mhm.
like we did bookwork and things like that, sort of. Eventually, my mom just kind of gave up, and when she was like, "You guys aren't going to do it," so we ended up. But my parents were so conscientious about being engaged with us and
Right.
asking us what we were interested in, and fostering that wonder and that curiosity, and say, why do you think that is? Why do you think that's happening? And getting us to ask ourselves that question. And that, by the way, is how you begin to learn how to think critically,
Right.
is by saying, I don't know. Why does that happen? Why does this do this? Why are we having a total solar eclipse? Why? Oh, that's very interesting. I've seen that in the news. There's a total solar eclipse coming. What does that mean? What is
Right.
that going to do? And so we just foster this attitude of curiosity. And I love how you said earlier, the facts, we can find the facts later, but you can't go back and fix curiosity. You can't make someone curious who has not been taught to be that way from a young age.
And you can drive it out. I mean, there'll always be a little tiny glimmer of like the gaslight, but but if you are busy saying, I got to check these boxes, we'll get to your curiosity later, by then everybody's worn out. And no wonder parents are like, I can't even visualize what that would be because I'm so busy making them jump through all these hoops. How do I have, I don't want to hear, but if you skip the hoop jumping and you just prioritize the connection and the conversation and the fueling curiosity, just have kind of a reframe on how do you parent. And so I think that that's the way to success. I think it will really serve your kids well. I know a lot of times the question often comes, well, what if they want to be a doctor? What if they want to go to college? What if they want to be an engineer? Well, the kids I know that are engineers were busy with their Lego for a very long time. They were stringing strings and sliding guys down the room, and they were building stuff, and they had tons of activities and playtime with math. And then at about mid-teen level, they went to community college and they had so much life experience that they could now tap all of that abstract stuff. Oh, that's what that's called. Oh, yeah, yeah. That happens every time. How cool is that? I didn't know. And that, but they have real life experience that they get to hook it into. And so then they just soar. They didn't have to do math figures, they didn't have to do computation facts. That's just us remembering how we were indoctrinated into math, which didn't really serve very many of us. And so the kids that want to be engineers, that playtime move them into that. Same for doctors and anybody. For instance, my son never wrote a research paper, never wrote a book report, never wrote anything other than thank you notes to grandma because he wanted to keep getting gifts. And that's a real cause and effect thing. And in the beginning, what we did was we traced, we he would dictate, thank you for the hockey stick, blah blah blah. And I would type it on the computer and we'd make the font really, really pale. And then he'd take a felt tip pen and trace it. And she's like, his penmanship's beautiful. I'm like, isn't it? His penmanship was horrible. But she liked it and it made everybody happy. And so he never did any of that. And then but he loved to travel and he loved to do community service and he did all kinds of stuff. And then we had an exchange student, and then he went to Japan as an exchange student. And he discovered, I want to be in the Peace Corps. Only the Peace Corps requires a degree. Guess I'll get one. I'm like, okay. And so he didn't know about diagramming sentences or any of that kind of stuff. And he ended up taking the community college assessment. He did fine on math and reading. Writing, he didn't do well on because you had to do a persuasive paper. And here in Texas, it's always about a school related topic because you know how when you're indoctrinating, you just always fuel other systems. And so the first question was we have this thing called pass or fail. If a kid has to make a 70 by Friday to be able to play in the football game. And, football's king in Texas. And so what do you think? Do you think that's a good idea or not? That was what his topic was. So he's like, well, if it's the only thing the kid is good at, but I understand, he was playing both sides, which is a big old F when it comes to a persuasive paper. And so he's like, okay, fine, mom, tell me, because 17-year-old doesn't always like to be told what to do. And I'm like, okay, so persuasive papers, you pick a side, stay with it, no matter what. Intro, couple of sentences, 3 supporting arguments, conclusion, the reverse of that. You flip the intro upside down, use a word like incidentally, make sure you spell it right or don't, because that'll help with your rubric. Start every sentence with a capital letter, end every sentence with a period, and you will pass. And so he goes back, he's like, okay, I did practice one. And then he went back and it was like school uniforms, pro or con. This is a kid who drew Zelda symbols on his shoes. He was so not a school uniform kid. And he said, but I could think of 3 reasons why a parent might want to do it. So I went for it. I'm like, there you go. It's about passing this. And you're not going to enlighten the the test reviewer. And he passed it. And so he took the community college classes and he just took the ones that he really kind of wanted so that he would have enough credits to transfer to a university. So we knew he was going to go to a particular university that was close by. So we looked at which English does he need to take in community college so that it will transfer. And so he transferred as a sophomore and got to skip the SAT and the ACT because you're a transfer student at that point. And he ended up, this kid, no book report, no research paper. The persuasive thing was, one afternoon I explained it to him, and ceremonial breaking of the pencils, that kind of and he has a degree in journalism. And because he says, I think I'll be a travel writer. Then they'll pay me to travel. That'll be cool. And he's not a travel writer. He actually works he does software stuff because that's kind of what he knew. He played a lot of World of Warcraft and Nintendo and things like that. But and now he actually has an MBA. So all of those things that you think, oh, well, we got to make sure they can do this or do that or they won't be successful. It's not true. It's just not true.
Mm.
They will be as successful as they want to be. He could have been a doctor. He could have been anything he wanted. It's just about then at about 16 or 17, they can take community college kind of as a, or 17 or 18. Or my oldest daughter took community college classes. She failed all of the assessments because she had done acting and dance and vocal voice training, and she wrote a little fan fiction. She did that kind of stuff. Now she's a script writer. So she did poorly on the test. She freaked out about testing. And so they put her in what I call remedial stuff. So she took the classes that you take pass or fail in order to take the regular college classes. And so she did 3 semesters of pre-math, 2 semesters of pre-writing, and 1 semester of pre-reading kind of stuff, if you think of it like that. And then in the end, didn't want to go to a regular university and went to the New York Film Academy. And but having had that community college stuff, they're like, sure, come on, because whatever your highest level of education is, that's what the next thing wants. They don't really care what your high school stuff was. Did you graduate? Mom says yes. Okay. um, but then that community college part is kind of like a good transition for people that haven't done a lot of structured traditional learning. I like to point people towards that as an easy entrance to a system that if you have a career path that you want a particular thing, like Michael with the Peace Corps, which he did end up doing, and he needed a degree for it. So he wanted to find a degree that he would enjoy because he'd had this life where do what you enjoy. And so that's what he did. And the same with the others. So they just, and then my youngest didn't even take community college classes because she went to cosmetology school in what would have been her senior year, and now is a salon owner and has 12 stylists work for her, and it's a multi-million-dollar business, and she just turned 30.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's not that money is the barometer for success, but it is not off the table
Mhm.
if you
Mhm.
choose an alternative life.
Yes, it's the same for me. I mean, I went to college, but I didn't use it for what I do now at all. And I have a very successful company, and the girl that runs my shop, manager, she's got a very expensive degree. I don't require that. I say, do you come to work? Do you work hard? Can you handle stuff? I don't
Right.
require it at all. And I'm glad that she has it, but she could have done this job without it. It would have been
I
just fine.
Yeah, I think I have a degree in nursing. I taught in nursing school. I make more money in my company now than I ever made doing any of that, you know? And
Mhm.
I can stand my PJs a lot of the time. So that's kind of nice too.
Well, and
But
I think in a lot of ways, my parents, what they did with unschooling for us taught us things that have allowed me to be even more successful in my company because I'm willing to disrupt the system as it
that's
is. I'm
that's
willing to ask questions and say, okay, people are making these products this way. What if we did it differently? What if we just totally changed things and did it a totally different way? And I'm willing to make those changes and ask those questions. And even with things just as simple, um, and this is nothing derogatory at all to my team, but it just when, none of these people are homeschooled that work for me, and we'll come to a problem, and the way that they solve it is very different than
oh,
the way that I solve it.
absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
solve it in this much bigger picture. How can we look at
So many
5,
options.
6 steps down
Right.
the line and
Right.
and look at all the different ways to address this situation instead of let me just fix this for this problem right in front of me.
And that I think is a school thing. And I don't, like Alyssa, my youngest, who has the hair salon, that was something that, and she went a year and a half to high school because she wanted to have an experience there that she didn't get to have away from that. And and so she's kind of seen both sides. And one of the things she told me when she started working in the hair industry is how afraid everybody is
Mm.
and how everybody has to get 14 opinions before they make a decision. And that there's not a right or wrong. There's not a flip to the back answer sheet, in the back of the chapter or something. So they're like very, very, very uneasy. And I think a whole lot of people can relate to that. And she says, I grew up in a way that take a stab at it. Let's see. And, most mistakes will, so you skin your knees a little. All right. Didn't, but it all just became like data to use for the next decision. But that's how she's grown this business, is that she's willing to give things tries that everybody else takes a long time to get to because they have to overcome so much fear, so much people pleasing, so much, because we had all those years of being humiliated if we made a wrong decision, for those of us that went to school. And so our kids don't have that as a way to keep us playing small until we just can't, until we have to break out of the box. Well, she never played small. Ever.
Yes. I relate to that so much. And even, when I was young, because one of the biggest questions is, just with any kind of homeschooling is socialization and how will you deal with socialization? My biggest issue with that was that I was confident in myself and I didn't play the weird teenager games. I didn't understand that dynamic of this weird, language that they spoke, or I was just kind of myself and they thought I was weird. And that was difficult when I was a teenager. But then when I became an adult, I was this self-aware person who could hold my own and have legitimate conversations with people. I didn't have to like feel weird around other adults. And so,
I think it's interesting too that once you leave the school age, nobody asks whether you went to high school or were homeschooled. You're just who you are. And
mhm.
so my thought when you were saying that is you would have been weird at school.
I
Because
think that's probably true. I
just
think I
your
would have been weird.
personality. And I think we sometimes say homeschoolers are weird. We don't have a corner on the market of weird. When my son went to Cub Scouts and his full group was all schooled except for him and one other kid, there were some weird kids in there and they were schooled kids. And so I just don't, I think that it has to do with, it has a lot, there's just a lot of factors that make some kids weird or not. And I think that the socialization thing is kind of like one of those questions that kind of like, how's the weather? Nobody really thinks about it. And so socialization is the question. But the truth is, I don't really want them to be indoctrinated. I really do want them to be self aware, like you're describing. I really do want them to stand up to bullies. I really do want them to not be afraid of authority. All of you think of what would I like as socialization? Think of that. Think of break it down. What means socialized? Well, um, I don't want conformity. I want confidence. Socialization in school is about conformity. There will be a heck of a lot to have to unlearn once you leave that school system because that's the way you survive in that system and how you excel. And it's all about competition. And none of that matters in real life. And so that socialization, I think that that might even be a carryover from our own school experience where we saw somebody singled out and bullied for being different. And we don't want our kid to be singled out and bullied. Okay, well, then let's help them figure out how to how do you deflect if somebody does something like that? How do you stand up for someone that can't stand up for themselves? That gives you all kinds of confidence. And then suddenly you may be the weird kid, but you also have these other things too, just like everybody else. Everybody else has a little weirdness and a little bit of strengths. And my weirdness isn't your weirdness. And suddenly weird isn't even a thing anymore because nobody can define it. And my experience too was that the kids that grew up around a lot of adults, they had better vocabulary, they had better skills in problem solving. They had been listened to, so they didn't have to learn how to be quiet and defer to the authority and or lie so that they could get what they wanted because the authority said do this and this. Yeah, I did it. Instead it was a conversation. And I think that when we break apart socialization may actually be the reason to do this.
Right?
You know.
It's so funny whenever people ask me anything about like, don't you worry that your kids aren't at the right level, or don't you worry that they're, not socially adjusted? And I'll say, have a conversation
Have
with
you met
any
them?
one of my children, please. Even my 3-year-old, any one of them. I won't script it. You go ahead, ask them whatever you want to ask them and see how they do. And people are blown away with my kids' ability to have a conversation, to talk about interesting things, to engage, to care about people and be interested in wondering what they're doing. And not all of my kids are, as good at it,
Well, some
some
have
are more.
introverted traits and extroverted traits, and like people, don't like people,
Yes.
like to be put on the spot, don't like to be put on the spot, that kind of thing. I remember my son went to have when they're teenagers, about mid-teens, they take them to doctor's appointments and dentist appointments and they don't let mom go in. And so he's in the dental thing and I'm out in the waiting room and all of a sudden I see the dentist come out and whisper something to the front desk person. And she points to me and he comes around to the door. He says, "Can I speak to you a minute?" I'm like, "Oh God, what did Michael say?" And he said, "I just want to tell you something." I'm like, "Okay." And he said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "I know you don't send him to school, but he asked me about this picture I have in the room of me on a boat with a big fish. And where was that? And was it this kind of fish or that kind of fish? And we had this whole conversation about it. And I have never once had a teenager in my office ask me about that. And he was a delight. I'm like, "Oh, that's so good to hear."
It worked.
Yay! So, yeah, I think when you say, "What about socialization?" Maybe socialization is exactly why we're doing
Mhm. My mom would used to say, "Yes, it is a problem. I agree."
it. Right. It is a problem. I won't tell you where the problem is, but
Yes. Well,
but
gosh, this has gone by really quickly, and I feel like we've just scratched the
I
surface. There's
know.
so much more to learn. And so you work with people one on one, you do coaching?
Do. I have one-on-one. I have a membership group where there's 100 and some people that other unschooling parents can kind of bounce ideas off each other and share ideas. And I have a huge library because, we started in the 90s and I'm a writer. So we've got bazillions of PDFs because I love to make them. You've got a problem, I've got a PDF for it. And so well, I have a library that the members have access to, and I have a YouTube channel where people can follow and learn a little bit more. And I do a monthly free webinar, and so that's over there. Let's see, where else do I have stuff? One-to-one coaching, group coaching. I have a book. Oh yeah, I wrote a book called, called Homeschooled Teens, and it's at Amazon, and it interviews 75 people, 75 young people of their life without school. And so I asked all the questions that I used to hear at the conferences where people would say, "Oh, how'd you make friends? Or how'd you get into college? Do you hate your mom?" All the kinds of things that people actually asked. I asked these 75 and they all just told me. And so it's a really great book still. And then I have a bunch of guides, little guides that are like, what about socialization? What about technology? What about record keeping or math or reading or things like that? How do unschoolers learn that? So a little $15 guide can really kind of give you a deep dive on it. And I have an unschooling mom to mom podcast that anybody can get just a small tidbit of information at my pep talk for parents. And then I have a jumping into unschooling course if you're new to it, and a learning math without curriculum course. So I have a lot of things, a lot of ways to help people figure out how to break free from the status quo.
Yes. So that's SuePatterson.com, right? Is your
Well, it's
website.
unschoolingmomtomom.com.
Okay. And then your social media
It's all
is
unschoolingmomtomom.com. If you put
okay.
that anywhere, that's what you'll see.
I will put that in the show notes for people to be able to find you. So yeah, if this has been kind of overwhelming and just a lot of like,
Yeah,
okay,
you're like,
I
what?
understand I understand the concept, but how does this actually work? There's no shortage of information and resources available to you, and
I even do
it's
little
doable.
30-minute calls that if somebody just has a couple of questions, you can I can give you the link for getting on the calendar and I'll just walk you through it. We can
That-
talk about your kid and the specifics that you're worried about. And that way you don't have to like sift through pages of
Yes, that's
of-
amazing. You're so amazing. I love that you're doing this because you could have been like, okay, I put in my work, I did the homeschooling, I'm done. But the fact that you're doing this for moms is such a wonderful blessing. And I
I'm
just
happy to do
appreciate
it. It
this.
makes me so happy. And actually it makes me think, oh, I wish I'd have figured that out a little sooner.
Yes.
So now I can help them figure out, learn from my mistakes.
Thanks for listening to the Naturally Noelle Show. If you enjoyed this content, please share with a friend. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Noelle's Naturals or at Naturally Noelle Show.